Thank you all. I'm interested in digging deeper into the telephony contract for which SSC was the primary signatory. In 2015, the contract was signed at a cost of $50 million over 10 years, but now a decade later, it has been tagged at $190 million, with an additional $24 million to be added through 2027. Mr. Jones, as President of Shared Services Canada, when you or your predecessor as President of SSC became aware of the massive contract increases through the 18 contract amendments, what would be the process for informing and or receiving approval from the Minister, please?
Well, thank you for the question. I think this actually gives an opportunity to clarify. So when the contract was competed, the Government of Canada put a number of very specific custom requirements, for example, building infrastructure, data centers, et cetera. So the $50 million that was talked about was never the base of the contract and the total cost. It was the minimum revenue that the company needed to make the investments. And so the contract value in 2017 was given to one of my predecessors, and it was $190 million, and that's what we expected, and that's where we're running at today. The additional money that's being asked is to extend the service beyond what its planned life was. There is a termination date of the contract, and it was just extended beyond that. But in general, the way this happened is when we put a contract in place, it goes to the market. We put our requirements out there. A number of bidders came in. Because of the requirement, they will come in and they will say, this is what needs to be done. This was not the government buying equipment to put in our data centers, so we don't pay an upfront hardware cost. They spread that over the life of the contract. But I don't know if either of my colleagues would like to provide more detail.
That's fine, Mr. Jones. Thank you very much. I guess what I'm really trying to get to the core of here is a contract which is more than quadrupled in size, cost Canadians hundreds of millions of dollars, and according to the Auditor General's report, hasn't met CRA's objectives, received scrutiny and final approval from who, please?
So the authorities that were granted were actually up to $300 million for this contract. Of which we are currently planning on the $190 million. That was the projection in 2017. The $50 million was the investment, the minimum revenue that the vendor needed to recoup for their physical investment. So that was in the original submission, and it is on track for the original contract submission.
Thank you. It does unnerve me a little bit that you do talk about how the $300 million, when it's not utilized, I don't think we can make light of an expenditure of $190 million, especially where there were so many significant 18 specifically contract amendments. The Auditor General spoke to cases where system outages impacted callers and that the contract signed by SSC didn't even consider whether performance penalties would apply to IBM. Why would that be?
That's actually one of the most important lessons learned. Because the government put in unique requirements, it meant that the standard commercial clauses were not what was being measured. So we put in unique measures for things, and it made it very difficult to hold the vendor to account. I can tell you that the vendor took those very seriously to respond to the performance issues at the beginning of the contract. But because of the way we learned a hard lesson on this, to put in commercial standard terms and conditions that you can hold vendors to account, not government-specific terms and conditions or government-specific requirements, which makes it very hard to hold them to account because it muddies their waters. And that's actually one of the biggest lessons that was applied in that not only the subsequent contact center contracts, but also many of our other contracts where we use standard terms and conditions that are used in the commercial world so we can compare apples to apples.
And I appreciate that. As my next question was going to be, IBM ensured that guarantees were built into the contract. It's why the contract, as you have indicated, was signed with a minimum work guarantee of $50 million. And did you not think it would be wise to include assurance measures within this contract? Did your agency expect the contract to rise above $50 million over the 10-year period?
Yes.
If so, by how much?
In 2017, the projection was that the contract that was given to one of my predecessors, the contract would be a total of $190 million over the course of its life. And it is right on track for $190 million. That was in 2017. And in 2025, we're at that moment. What is now the growth is an extension of that contract to give time to migrate to the new contact center solution.
Can you provide to the committee the documents behind that, please, Mr. Jones?
We can.
Thank you. Your organizational structure denotes a chief audit and evaluation executive. However, the Auditor General found limited validation of vendor invoices by both Shared Services Canada and the Canada Revenue Agency. The report also states, when asked, neither Shared Services Canada nor the Canada Revenue Agency could confirm whether the invoice levels of activity, which were the basis for charges, were accurate. What is the purpose of a specific audit and evaluation executive if contracts and expenses aren't being properly evaluated?
Perhaps I can turn to Scott Davis to talk about the work that was done. Our audit and evaluation, my audit and evaluation, chief audit and evaluation executive needs to cover the entire organization and is complementary to the work of the Auditor General, but it's for the internal management of the organization. What we do is we actually have in our chief financial officer branch, we go through and verify, and maybe Scott can provide some details.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so if I may, this audit focused on the service by Canadians by the CRA. I look very forward to the Auditor General coming back and doing the investigation that has been highlighted, because as you referred to as those 18 amendments, within them there was over 150 service orders, which are control points, and we received a full consolidated invoice, and we used a splitting tool between CRA and the other departments that are on this solution, and that's how we did our validation. So the validation that was verified was at the CRA level, but I'm looking forward to working with the OAG and our internal audit team to actually provide that transparency to this committee and to Canadians.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your testimony. You know, over the past few days, we've talked about the OAG report. So 4 to 5 times the information is not correct, given the evaluation is with respect to RSP. What about the quality for the information? We thought we had seen everything. We can see that Daniel LeBlanc from Radio Co taught us that the agency, for a very small company with, they got a refund check of $4,997.92 for a business that only had revenues of $304,000. Do you know the bank received the check, realized it didn't make sense, called the agency that conducted an investigation, and now they're suing the business to get this money back. Mr. Jones, can you explain whether or not this is true? Do you think the CBC Radio-Canada's report that from $5,000 there's a verification that's done, but otherwise you get automatic processing? Is that the case? Mr. Chair, we do understand the concerns raised by the member after reading this newspaper article. Unfortunately, we don't talk about individual cases, but what we can say is that the agency takes security very seriously, and that includes cybersecurity. The agency has set up various measures for preventive control to ensure that we are mitigating the risks. We also have controls that enable us to detect any suspicious transactions. Well, you have to admit these controls didn't work, because the figures that I provided to you, I will ask the question again. Internally, is there somebody that when you receive a refund of over $7,000 that someone pays attention to it, but underneath $5,000 it's done automatically? Is the answer yes or no? I can't answer that question, Mr. Chair. Mr. Paget, with all due respect, you're in federal court for this particular case. That's why I'm asking you the question. How I'll ask you the question again. Is it true that $5 million and over, it's an observer, someone from the agency that takes a look at it, but under that figure, it's done automatically? Yes or no? I have to give you the same answer. So how many cases are before the court? Before the court, yes, the checks for $4.9 million that are being challenged because you didn't do a proper verification. To my knowledge, there are no other cases. And when you found out about this case, and we're talking about $4,900,000 and 72 cents, because this. So CBC affirms that this $6 million, well, when it goes over, it's an officer that looks at it, but under that, it's done automatically. And this is your issue. Canadians are entitled to know whether this case is, since this has happened, have you changed anything? Is it under $3 million or under $2 million? At a very minimum, you do your agency does an audit or checks it. Yes or no? Absolutely. When there are weaknesses, we take measures immediately. So what's the threshold now? Is it 3, 2, 1 million? Once again, that's something that I cannot tell you. Why did it take someone from the TD Bank to make you open your eyes? We work closely with our partners, including financial institutions. But someone at the TD Bank had their eyes open, fortunately. Otherwise, Canadians would have been defrauded by $5 million. What are you going to what are you going to say to Canadians? The same thing that I said at the beginning. We have a control to prevent fraud. We have preventive controls where we have an overview of what's happening. You know, there are people that receive bonds for over $1,000, and it's a drama. And now we find out that from CBC Radio-Canada that for almost $5 million, you didn't do a proper verification. What are you going to tell the taxpayer who's hoping that the CRA does things properly? And what about your employees who are prepared to do a lot of work but get replaced by machines? I would say the same things. We have controls in place in order to detect fraudulent situations. We have mechanisms to recover the money as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jones, first of all, thank you for coming here with your team today. We were shaken by the last report. Thank you very much. You talked about IBM that has multiplied the contracts that go beyond the budget, gone beyond what was expected. Phoenix has been gone over the amount that was initially provided for by billions of dollars. The modernization of benefits went from 1.75% to 4.5 million, and it's not over yet. For the communication center, went from 50 million in 2015 to all this because IBM does not evaluate the cost of the initial project as he should have done. Is that the reason behind this? How can you justify that the government is not able to have any light shed on this? In Quebec, we've gone through this, and we had a commission of inquiry in the province. Do you think that's required in this case? Thank you for your question. The contract for the contact centers, it's within the margin that was established at the time of the contract. This increased in time with increasing requirements, but the value remains the same for the services. The other contracts, we learned a lesson from all of the examples that you gave, and that is the government sets unique requirements that are not aligned with commercial standards that exist throughout the world. And when we ask somebody to amend the contract, well, that created the requirements that led to this problem. And that's one of the lessons, one of the most significant lessons that we learned. It's important to anchor this with the contract, but in addition, in November 2017, SSE signed a contract of $500 million without a request for tender. And in 2017 and 2018, there was a maintenance contract and for supporting software in 6 departments. Have these contracts been renewed? When and for how much? And was there a tender process? I think you're referring to the mainframe contract. I'm sorry. There was no tender process for this process, so the citizen is often the loser in all this. I can give you other examples. In 2016, the government spent $20 million for information technology. And it was tailored for 3 companies. So IBM represent almost $2 billion worth of contracts. Can you provide a little bit more information about this? Can you provide us with information about the 10 biggest suppliers in your department and with the cost associated with that? That will give me some insight to ensure that there are proper reference points. Is that possible to provide the committee with this list of the 10 biggest suppliers? Thank you for your question. Yes, absolutely. This $50 million, that was a baseline. We've already explained that. But when we sign contracts in partnership with suppliers, in this particular case, this wasn't a service that you could buy like a subscription. It was really an investment, an industry investment with us. And obviously, they had to work with us to see it through. That's a conclusion that we made. So I understand. But without a tendering process, that opens the door to a lot of abuse. Perhaps when we can see that once you've given the contract, we saw an explosion of costs. Another project that got off the rails, the contribution management system that went from $408 million to over $700 million a few years later. The Auditor General obviously did an audit on this matter, and another software management program also went off the rails. So why don't you develop some internal expertise with specialized services so you can, now we're talking about $36 million in 2023-24, it's an enormous amount of money. Why don't we have a specialized team that could deal with this? Generally speaking, there are 2 reasons that explain why we use an outside vendor. The first reason is because the government does not have the technology in the government. And that would cause for a rupture in the services because everything's integrated in existing government services. This is what we call systems legacy. So there's a lot of infrastructure associated with that. That's a huge challenge for us. So we use another service, a benchmarking service, to assess whether we are receiving good value for the money spent. But that's a challenge that SSE has. The Auditor General noted in her report that there are 67 systems. That's not a good situation. And that's something we have to deal with because we don't have a modern application. We have to have one. It's remained the same for years, and modernizing this system is a very complicated process, generally speaking, and we try to use basic technology and to adapt it to our needs. And now we're dealing with commercial services. We need to change the software so that it aligns with the government services. So that's a real challenge for the government. Also, the government supplies services that exist elsewhere in the government. For instance, we can't buy Microsoft Immigration. But we can use a lot of the commercial software that's available. And that's a lesson that we learned and that we've agreed to. Thank you very much.